I run my own communication strategy speechwriting thing called Little and Media, and Eve and the Beacon Fire people were dumb enough to give me an open microphone for large periods of time here in the Beacon Lounge to ask questions and sort of have conversations about social good and the ways that we might think about this differently. I'm very excited to be joined by Michael Silberman, who is the director of the Mobilization Lab for Greenpeace, but more importantly, a long time friend. We went to the same middle school. We worked together at Echo Ditto. We have both been involved in politics, he on the Dean campaign, and I covered the Dean campaign for the Hotline many years ago. But Michael is just one of those people that you are fortunate to know and learn from. So I'm going to grill him incessantly, because I don't get that many opportunities to do so. Okay. First off, the Mobilization Lab in Greenpeace is, I think, relatively unique, particularly in the social good space or not, which is, I mean, it's dedicated to innovation, testing, learning, and sharing information about ways to improve the work that Greenpeace does to, have an impact on the world around a variety of different social issues. Yeah. What is it about the process or the approach to the Mobilization Lab that other organizations in the social good space, or just organizations in general, would benefit by understanding or embracing? What is it that makes the Mobilization Lab so effective or so unique in how it functions?
Sure. I think there are a few things that are kind of unique about the setup. I've seen, and increasingly we're seeing some other organizations try to follow this model, but what's unique to me is how the organization has said, in order to advance dramatically, in order to rapidly upskill the organization in certain digital skills and people-powered campaigning, we need to set up a way for some people to work outside of the day-to-day structure, outside of the hierarchy and bureaucracy, because that's not going to be an effective way to make rapid change at the scale and pace that we want. So the Mobilization Lab sits outside of that day-to-day and almost orbits the global organization, and can therefore come in, can maintain its own budget, but then also come in at different levels, either working with executive directors in a somewhat confidential or non-confidential way to help them figure out staffing and structures, or to work with a community of practitioners to help people get better at their work. And I think that's markedly different from the approach that says we're going to ask someone who already has a certain digital job or other kind of job to put on an innovation hat in addition to what they're already doing.
I think a lot of organizations don't embrace that approach for any number of reasons, but least of which includes money. Sure. There is a cost, and the accountability of that cost, meaning the ROI is unknown by design, right? You're trying to figure things out, you're trying to break things and put them back together, and that can be expensive, and it does not, because it orbits the organization, necessarily immediately, reinforce the existing programmatic elements of the organization, or because it freaks people out that your mission in some respects is to challenge what is already happening so that you can rapidly take it to the next level. What is it in your experience, both with the Mobilization Lab and obviously sort of across your career, that makes it so difficult for organizations to do what the Mobilization Lab is doing? And even in Greenpeace, what still doesn't the Mobilization Lab get the opportunity to do, that kind of is like, well, you said we were going to be independent, but you keep calling me into your office and saying, stop insulting our partners, or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, each organization has its own set of challenges, for sure, as I think any of us who work at different organizations know. Greenpeace still has, while we've had wonderful success, we still run into plenty of scenarios where we're still questioning, you're still challenging, you're still having people wonder why you're challenging the status quo and the way in which they've been running campaigns for decades, since 1970, that have worked fine without people power, or we've won battles and campaigns through effective media work, or through a good use of nonviolent direct action that hasn't involved mass mobilization in certain cases. Now, there's overwhelming evidence that we can't win at the scale of the challenges we need to without enabling the full potential of all the people we are connected to. and that are, for us, the argument that is clear is that the targets and a lot of the people we are campaigning to change and transform are not responsive to just a single organization like Greenpeace. In fact, they will only make the changes in the world that we wish to see with the full pressure of consumers or voters and citizens. So for us, there's a clear case to be made if we can address the challenges or the challengers in the context of what is our core business. And so for us, the core business is campaigning. The UNICEF Innovation Lab, they'll be joining us for a session later this week on how to address this kind of change within institutions. Their core business is helping children, so that kinds of innovations they're making are not around, or the changes they're making within the organization are not necessarily around how to communicate better online or engage more people online, but to speed up the delivery of a certain service to certain school kids in Y country. Different use of technology.
And how much of that that evolution of your challenge is the result of sort of reaching the limits of campaigning in the world and the way it's structured, and how much of it is the result of the world fundamentally being changed as a result of connectedness and technology? How much of it is just yeah, campaigning's great, but you can't take down X with a media effort or a protest alone, and how much of it is there's a new set of rules and we're going to have to figure out a new definition of campaign and nonviolent civil protest because of whatever the internet has done to mess with what we know.
Yeah, well, I think it's, not to just meet you in the middle, but I think it's both, because
Take a stand, man.
It's only this. No, I think what we're seeing is that the landscape, for me, the landscape of change making has fundamentally shifted, right? So it's no longer the expectation, we no longer have, and part of why we exist, and this is what's changing the strategies, is that people no longer need to wait for a big institution like Greenpeace to act, right? People now, it's clear that people have, with the democratization of technology, there's more tools than ever in people's hands to be able to make change, so that they don't need to. So that totally changes what Greenpeace has to do. When you look around and see 50 million people are on change.org and familiar with the idea that I can start a petition and make and reinforce the idea that I can make change without going through a usual power broker or usual NGO with professionalized campaigners that have special access to media, whatever, then that changes my perception of how change happens. So we're starting to see a shift towards people-led or grassroots-led change instead of NGO-led change, I think, and that is true both on the side of the people we are trying to engage as an organization, but also within the campaigning landscape, the people we are trying to influence also see that it's not just the professionalized campaign organizations that have the ability to speak up. So if it's only those professionalized organizations, then maybe it's not such a real campaign. If it doesn't also involve broader participation of people who can stand up for themselves.
So let me pick on the word campaign for a second.
Okay.
My background's in politics. I love campaigns. Campaigns have limited impact, at least direct impact, right? They raise awareness, which is incredibly powerful. In many cases, they provide motivation or advocacy on behalf of certain issues or certain causes. Campaigns can even be oriented around providing training and guidance. But the levers that need to be pulled often are beyond the reach of a campaign. So does the community that you engage, and does the work of the Mobilization Lab that have a view of what the ways in which people can affect change that is more direct than simply expanding the types or diversifying the ways in which awareness or advocacy are done, right? You mentioned consumer influence, so obviously purchase power is one of the things, but even purchase power has some limits because the business imperative of the company that's being targeted has changed, blah, blah, blah. So how do you basically actually change things? Legitimately, directly change things as a result of people-powered campaigns? Or what are you trying to figure out to essentially lead to an answer to that question?
I think I think that kind of the next level that you're getting at is sustained. What does sustained organizing look like, and what is this? So moving from mobilization, which I think increasingly can be defined as the power you have to get a lot of people to do something at some point, online or in space, physical space, at a moment in time, versus sustained, community organizing, where it's, yes, those communities of people who will stand up when in coordination with a campaign when they know there's a moment, but are also driving change on their own. And so I guess to me, the shift from campaigning, where organization-led campaigning, to the next phase, which wouldn't necessarily, which Greenpeace is looking at, but I think is challenging for every organization or every institution to figure out right now, including political campaigns that invest in organizing, drop this idea at the end of a political campaign, typically, that people, once engaged, could drive their own local community efforts on the same issues in a sustained, ongoing way that doesn't necessarily involve the deep involvement of a campaigning organization, which has those tight limited time frames.
And just as an aside to that, and this is taking off your Greenpeace hat for a second, if you consider something like purchase power, for example, or product innovation to be one of those more sustained methods of change, is there a natural connection between something that the mobilization lab might prompt and the actions that you want people to take long term, that is not just individual change, but actually like, hey, if we're going to have better access to clean water, if we're going to have whales not being killed and sustainable sources of energy being drawn from somewhere else, we need someone to invent that damn thing.
Right.
So the whole campaign is simply to form a market, or to form a series of companies that would then, through the existing bounds of free market competition, actually then go and do something that is not kind of quasi-political in nature, or quasi social goody in nature.
Well, I think the clean tech space is very much falls into this category. I don't know if it's exactly what you're thinking of, but to me, it's not. We're seeing campaigns focus not just on shutting down coal plants anymore, but also creating a level playing field for new energy technologies, right, and rapid advances in efficiency technologies and things that are not anti or stopping this, which is kind of one more traditional form of campaigning, stop the bad stuff, but instead creating new markets for things that are just better, creating the better world that we want to live in. And I don't know how much that translates across issues. It could be interesting to think about, but certainly it's very apparent to me in the energy space, environment. Yeah.
Shifting focus for 1 sec, one of the things that the Mobilization Lab embraces very heavily is learning and sharing the experiences, and particularly, at least in name, failure. I was railing the other day because I feel like we have almost professionalized the idea of celebrating failure without actually benefiting from the learnings that failure creates. Yeah. What is it that you are able to do in terms of sharing failure that doesn't freak people out, that would be a lesson for others? Is it just we don't care because we're independent, so we can fail, that's what our mandate is, it's no big deal, and thus an argument for the independence? Or is there a way that you are able to extract the lessons from failure and communicate them in a way that benefit others, that were others to adopt that or embrace that, we might actually start to see the concept of maximizing failure pay the dividends we truly desire it to pay?
Yeah, I still think this is actually a bigger challenge, even if I think this is a massive challenge still, this idea of celebrating or sharing failure. I actually don't think I think as you said, it's not really happening. I think there are a lot of disincentives still for people to share meaningfully, so I think we're kind of fail-washing things and saying, oh, I tried this, it didn't work, but then I tried this, and it was so much, so it's kind of, you gloss over you didn't really share the full failure story because it's your way of humbly sharing the success story in a lot of cases. So we have been focused more on lifting up bright spots, because that is, within an organization where everyone is trying to still make a good case for their own work, it is a lot easier for us to share the bright spots and get people to learn from that. We are still struggling to find good ways to hear about the failures. And honestly, a lot of the fails are kind of those, they're almost, a lot of the ones we're running into are it's strange to say that they're almost not worth talking about because they're almost bonehead things. Like, well, we didn't A/B test that. Why? You know, like, I mean, there's only so much to drill into. They ran out of time. They didn't think about it. There's not. It's just bad practice. It wasn't a huge fail that they learned from. It was just kind of like, yeah, I know I should have done this a better way and didn't. So we're still struggling with the ways to get at those in ways that people are willing to, where there are big learnings. I think to me it's tied to risk is the other thing. So there's not going to be good fail stories unless people are willing to take risks, and so that's what we're still trying to create the space. And part of our role
really aggressive
for actually taking the right, because you're not really going to have an interesting fail to talk about unless you really took a step out of your usual space.
Which is interesting, as just an aside, because I feel like particularly the civil action that Greenpeace specialized in the 70s and 80s had huge risk attached to it. So if any organization has in its DNA the idea of huge, outlandish, stunty, risk-oriented things, I would put Greenpeace on that list. And so in the digital context, to be a little more risk-averse, it's just an interesting juxtaposition. It doesn't surprise me when most organizations are not that way. It surprises me a little bit more that, and depresses me slightly, because if Greenpeace isn't able to take big, bolder risks in the digital space, like, who is? I mean, you're chaining yourselves to things and, sort of swatting the bridge. But
yeah, well, another thing on this, I mean, I think we can talk about how big brands are scared of their,
Wait, that's my next question.
Okay, well, we'll get, so we'll say that, but I think what I was going to say about taking risk in the digital space, increasingly, it's not, I think, it often feels impossible to make the call of this was a fail, because there's always more testing you can do. So a lot of the time we see, so there's kind of this ongoing, we looked at, so take Avaz, for example, they sent out an email on behalf of the 30 activists who were arrested off the coast of Russia in international waters, were in prison for 2 months under trial, massive campaign, the Arctic 30. And Avaz, as a helpful ally, was willing to send out an email to its members, and its millions of members. And they sent, the first one flopped, the second one flopped, and so is that a fail story? And they kept going. They ultimately tested, some 25 variations, and ultimately became the most successful campaign they had sent out in as long as the people we were talking with could remember. So to me, that's more of how do we do smarter testing, and not, because they could have just written that up and said, I mean, it's not, we took a risk, we went outside of what our members normally ask us to do, this was not on their agenda, and the response, it was a fail. But it wasn't a fail, it just required many more iterations in testing, and that's true with a lot of some of the tools we introduced to campaigns. Share a new A/B sharing tool or whatever other kinds of new technologies. It's just a matter of finding the right. Sometimes it's not that it's a fail as much as it's a risk to use it, but we still have to spend more time to see what the right implementation of it is.
2 more quick questions.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people gathered at South by Southwest who are not, activists and social good focused people who are doing very interesting things and talking about very interesting things. Are there types of companies or sectors or whatever that are doing things that you think have a potential interesting disruptive effect to your work? Wearables, or certain things in data, or something having to do with television, or something having to do with whatever that has absolutely, at present, no conceivable connection to activism and social action and political change and all of that, that you're kind of like, there's something there, there's a trend there, there's an expertise there that were to be plugged in, could be very interesting or influential in how we think about stuff going forward.
Sure. So Greenpeace has a long history of nonviolent direct action, right? That's one of its at the core. And I think so. There are 2 areas that are interesting now to look at. So in the wake of Snowden and other forms of there's a question of what is online nonviolent direct action, or what is the future of online civil disobedience, right? Certainly is being prosecuted quite heavily in many cases. We've seen I think the Aaron Swartz story was really illuminating for a lot of activists and organizations. But so I think that's one, which is that's a very new space for everyone to figure out. What does it look like to the equivalent of standing outside the White House and demonstrating your support or opposition to something and potentially getting arrested and not even necessarily seeing a prison cell, but getting a slap on the wrist is quite different than what would happen if you took some kind of equivalent action online. It would very likely be treated as a federal felony. All right, so there's some real interesting, that's a really interesting space. And what are all the different things? So if for example, you were participated in a denial of service attack by even installing something on your computer or letting a certain website run without you doing anything, that could be prosecuted certainly more heavily. So that's an interesting new space to be looking at. The other, in terms of technology, I think, is robotics and wireless, various wireless technologies that would allow someone who is involved, who is taking a serious risk to, say, prevent some kind of toxic discharge into a water source, for example, by installing some kind of device that that could prevent that, and then have that robotically and remotely controlled by, say, people online who could
non-human civil disobedience.
Yeah, well, humans involved, right? So how do you so what could people on the internet, so let's say you want to do some form of mass mobilization of people who could take some action to stop something bad from happening, but it's really still that small group of bold and brave individuals who are willing to go to the source of that problem using new forms of technology, robotics perhaps, and get involved in the traditional definition of nonviolent direct action. For one definition is actually putting your body on the line to stop something. So as you start looking at new technologies or drones or other things that can enter spaces that previously were the domain of people climbing fences and showing up inside the perimeter of a, so.
Before I let you go, this is a unique gathering, lots of different people from lots of different perspectives. What is the question that you want South by attendees to be answering or helping you think about? If you were standing on stage and had thousands of people from all these different disciplines, primed to apply their diverse expertise and capabilities, what would you want them to be focusing on that could help break through to that next level of what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think we need to do a lot of thinking about the quality of the experience we are supporting or enabling for people. And this comes to mind just after several days of being bombarded on the street corners and different lounges by various marketing teams, right? And I think I'm just stunned, and maybe this is just more in some sectors than others, but I really am stunned at the amount of kind of one-way broadcast marketing that is still out there, which is, I think glazing all of our eyes over, and at the end of the day, we're happy to take the free beer from whoever sponsored it to get out of our minds, but it really is an intense level of kind of one-way bombardment that I think we're not used to anymore in a space where we control so much of our interactions. And so I would be thinking about, and I was asking folks this last night, if you had an unlimited budget, what would the quality experience be? You're that grand organization trying to make a memorable impact on someone, but so much of it is just missing the mark, I think. So how do we add value to people's lives rather than continue to, and create space for them to lead and live in ways that are actually in their design and not in the design of the marketer or the organization that is trying to shout louder. And that's not a new challenge, but it's certainly surfacing for me here. And it's important and it's critical for organizations. And we're seeing, like, at Charity Water is an off-site example, but they were here the other day, and it's amazing when you start hearing the stories of what happens when you create platforms that are in line with what people want to be working on and doing, and enable them the space to lead. What can happen? So.
That's a great question. All right, Michael Silberman from Mobilization Lab at Greenpeace. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.